She wore the ring that used to be mine. But 6 years later, I wore the piece she never found. And when our eyes met at Mom's funeral, I knew some victories speak without a word. This is a story about betrayal and the unexpected freedom that followed. The sky hung low over Brookline that morning, its gray clouds heavy with rain and silence. Elena Carver stood by her mother's casket, hands clasped tightly in front of her, the soft black fabric of her dress absorbing the chill of the funeral home. She was 38 now, but in this room, in this moment, she felt like a little girl again, waiting for her mother's reassuring voice to guide her through another storm. Mourning, she had discovered, was not a tidal wave, but a series of slow, quiet floods. It was in the way she adjusted her mother's favorite brooch on the lapel of the casket cover. It was in the muted clink of porcelain as guests took sips of lukewarm coffee. And it was especially in the ache that deepened with each passing second, because she knew who would walk through the door next. She hadn't seen Lauren in 6 years. Nor Derek. Not since the day their betrayal shattered everything. But funerals like blood had a way of summoning family, even those who tore themselves out of your life like jagged glass. Around her, murmured condolences swirled like smoke, warm and suffocating. Aunts with careful mascara dabbed at their eyes. College friends of her mother whispered memories about church choirs and summer potlucks. Everyone meant well. But no one knew the weight of the moment that loomed. The door creaked open. A wave of whispers rippled through the room, soft as wind but sharp as blades. Elena turned her gaze slowly, deliberately, and there they were. Lauren moved with that effortless confidence she had always practiced, heels clicking softly against the linoleum, dark coat tailored to perfection, and her arm looped through Derek's. He looked older, still handsome in the tailored way of a man who clung to appearances, but the years had taken something from him. Perhaps it was the arrogance in his eyes, diluted now, uncertain. But it was Lauren who drew Elena's attention, not because of the couture or the perfectly pinned hair. It was the ring. The diamond. 5 carats. Oval cut. Set in platinum. The same ring Elena once wore. It caught the light like a cruel joke, refracting fragments of a past that had once promised forever. She inhaled slowly, keeping her composure. The storm she had feared didn't come. No rage. No panic. Just a strange, surprising calm. They hadn't seen her yet. Elena turned away, facing the casket again. Her mother's photo smiled softly beside the flowers. Margaret Carver, warm, elegant, unyielding in love. She had been the only reason Elena returned to Boston. The only one who could still tether her to this city of ghosts. Elena, a voice murmured behind her. She turned. Her father stood close, frailer now. His grip on the cane unsteady. His eyes, once so commanding, seemed hollow. She would have wanted peace, he whispered, nodding toward the approaching figures. Elena offered a small smile. I'm not here for war. She meant it. Her anger had been spent long ago in tear-soaked nights and therapy sessions, in the slow, aching rebirth of a life she rebuilt with no roadmap. What remained now wasn't vengeance. It was resilience. As Lauren and Derek reached the front, Derek hesitated. Then, with a barely perceptible nod, he extended his hand to Elena. She didn't take it. Sorry for your loss, he said. Elena's voice was level. Thank you. Lauren stepped forward. Her smile was thin, studied. Elena, you look well. Elena met her gaze, calm. So do you. A beat of silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken history. Lauren gestured toward the photo. She looks so peaceful. She was, Elena said. A pause, an awkward shuffle. Before Lauren could reply, a hand touched the small of Elena's back. She turned, and there he was. Lucas Foster. Slate gray suit. Quiet strength. He stood beside her like a fortress of warmth, his presence subtle, yet grounding. The man who had held her in the dark, who knew how to steady her breath when grief or memory took hold. His expression was gentle as he nodded to her father, then to Derek and Lauren. Lauren's brows twitched. Elena, she said, slowly, you're married. Elena held Lucas's hand. Yes. Derek's face paled. Lucas extended his hand, polite. Lucas Foster. I don't believe we've met. Derek took it with hesitation, eyes narrowing slightly. Derek Ralston. A pause. Lucas tilted his head just slightly. Ah. From Venture Core, Derek stiffened. Formerly. Something shifted in Lauren's expression. But Elena said nothing. She watched the realization bloom behind Derek's eyes. Lucas Foster, the man whose investment firm had backed the startup that crushed Derek's company 7 years ago. The man whose judgment had tipped the scale, whose strategic foresight had outplayed Derek's pride. And now he was Elena's husband. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. Just turned back to the casket, resting a hand gently on the wood. "I believe the service is about to begin," she said softly. Behind her the whispers started again. But Elena no longer heard them. She was already somewhere else in the quiet place her mother taught her to find in moments like this. A place of dignity, of strength. Not the kind you wear like armor, but the kind you grow from surviving something that should have broken you. As the minister took the podium and the music began, Elena let her shoulders relax. The past had shown up dressed in diamonds and regret, but the future stood beside her in the form of a man who knew her scars and chose to stay. And in that moment, beneath the low-hanging clouds and the heavy grief, Elena felt something she hadn't in a long time. Peace. 6 years earlier, Boston in autumn had felt like the beginning of everything. Elena remembered the rust-colored leaves skittering across the pavement as she rushed between meetings, coffee clutched in one hand, tablet in the other. At 32, she was the youngest marketing director in her firm's history, respected, driven, always moving. Her friends called her a storm in heels. She took that as a compliment. She wasn't looking for love. Not really. Not when her calendar was packed with investor presentations, client pitches, and charity galas. Not when her phone buzzed every 5 minutes with deadlines and ideas. But life has a strange way of interrupting even the most carefully curated schedules. She met Derek Ralston at a tech summit hosted at the Charles River Convention Center. He was on stage delivering a keynote on ethical AI, his voice steady, smooth, measured like the hum of an engine just below the surface. His suit was perfectly tailored, his presence magnetic, and when he glanced into the crowd mid-sentence, Elena felt absurdly that he had looked right at her. They bumped into each other during the cocktail hour afterward. Literally. She spilled a splash of red wine on his cufflink. "Perfect," she muttered, flustered. "It's just fabric," he said, chuckling. "But if it buys me a conversation with you, totally worth it." That night they talked for hours. About tech, yes, but also art, travel, family. He told her about his startup, his background, how he'd built everything from scratch after leaving Wall Street. She told him about her mother's homemade lasagna and how she once pitched a full campaign with the flu and a 102-degree fever. He liked her laugh. She liked that he noticed her ideas before her lipstick. Within weeks they were inseparable. Morning coffee dates became weekend getaways. Elena, who used to check her email before brushing her teeth, started sleeping in on Sundays just to linger in bed with him. One evening Derek surprised her with a yacht rental on Boston Harbor. Just the two of them, stars above, champagne chilling on ice. As the boat drifted quietly under the city skyline, he got down on one knee. The rings sparkled like frost, 5 carats oval cut set in platinum. "Elena Carver," he said, voice steady, "despite the wind, you make me believe in better versions of myself. Will you marry me?" She said yes, without hesitation. The memories still played in her mind like a scene from a movie she once adored but no longer watched. When she called her mother with the news, Margaret cried tears of joy. "Oh, sweetheart, he sounds wonderful. I can't wait to meet him. You deserve this, every bit of it." And for a time it really did feel like she had it all. Derek was charming, attentive, generous. Her career soared. Her friends envied her Pinterest-perfect relationship. Her mother immediately began dreaming about venue flowers and guest lists. And then came Lauren. Elena hadn't initially seen her sister's presence as a warning sign. Quite the opposite. Lauren, 2 years younger, had a way of slipping into rooms with laughter and compliments. She offered to help with planning. She offered to help with vendors. "Let me take some of the pressure off you, Ellie," she'd say, calling Elena by the childhood nickname she once adored. At the engagement party held under strings of warm fairy lights in their parents' backyard, Lauren wore a soft lavender dress and a too-sweet smile. She arranged centerpieces. She poured wine. She told Derek he looked dangerously handsome in that suit, and she watched him. Elena saw it, those lingering glances, the subtle touch on his forearm, the way her laughter stretched just a beat too long at his jokes. But she told herself it was nothing. Because they were grown-ups now. Because Lauren had changed. Because they weren't two girls fighting over a borrowed blouse anymore. They were women. Sisters. Elena believed in that. So, when Margaret suggested Lauren be maid of honor, Elena didn't hesitate. "Are you sure?" her mother had asked gently. "You know how she gets when I want this to bring us closer," Elena said. "It'll be good for us." And maybe, just maybe, she meant it more than she realized. Maybe some part of her needed to believe that love could heal the old rivalries. That time had softened their edges. So she handed Lauren a bridesmaid's bouquet. She handed her the timeline. She handed her unknowingly the opportunity. And Lauren, with that same sweet smile, took it all. The first crack was barely visible. It came in the form of a missed dinner, nothing dramatic, just a polite text at 6-7 p.m. saying something about a last-minute investor call. "Rain check," Derek wrote, adding a smiley face. Elena had just finished curling her hair. The second crack came days later when he commented on her laugh. They were at a gallery opening downtown, surrounded by abstract canvases and Prosecco flutes. Elena laughed at something their host said, a full, genuine laugh that used to make Derek smile with pride. But this time he winced. "You're kind of loud," he murmured gently as they moved toward the next room. "Maybe tone it down a little." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "I've always laughed like that." He gave a quick shrug. "Just an observation." Then came the comments about her clothes. That blue dress he once called killer, now a little washed out. Her favorite messy bun, maybe try something sleeker. Each remark on its own could have been brushed off as stress, preference, mood. But strung together they built a rhythm. A quiet pull away from her. She tried to write it off. Derek had been under pressure. The startup was entering Series B funding and his board was pushing hard. She told herself all engaged couples went through a rough patch before the wedding. And besides, there was Lauren. Always ready to step in to help. When Elena couldn't make it to a cake tasting because of a last-minute pitch meeting, Lauren went with Derek. "She knows what I like," Derek had said casually. The words stung more than they should have. Elena smiled anyway. "Great, thanks for helping." Lauren texted afterward he liked the dark chocolate with espresso ganache. Very refined, like him too. It was meant to be playful. Elena told herself not to read into it. Still, the message sat like a rock in her stomach. The following week, Elena found herself staying late at the office, burying herself in work she normally delegated. She began skipping yoga. Stopped texting her friends back. She barely noticed. She was too focused on fixing whatever was quietly unraveling. She started trying harder, dressing up more at home, planning date nights, cooking his favorites. But Derek was always tired. Always distracted. Always somewhere else. One Thursday evening, while tidying up Derek's car before a dinner party, Elena found an earring. It was wedged between the passenger seat and center console. Silver. Dangling, with a tiny sapphire stone. She froze. Her heart didn't race, it stopped. She knew that earring. It had been a gift from their grandmother. Lauren wore them at the engagement party. Elena turned it over in her fingers, her breath slow and heavy. Her first instinct was denial. Maybe Lauren had dropped it by accident. Maybe Derek really had given her a ride somewhere. Maybe. That night she held the earring out to Derek after dinner. His face didn't change. That hurt more than if he'd flinched. "Oh," he said, taking it from her fingers casually. "Lauren must have dropped it when I drove her to the florist last week. She said she lost one." "You never told me you took her to the florist." He raised an eyebrow. "Didn't I? Must have slipped my mind." It wasn't a big deal. Her silence pressed into the space between them like fog. Later, when she called Lauren, the story matched perfectly. "Oh, thank God," Lauren said cheerfully. "I've been looking everywhere for that earring. Derek was so nice to take me. My car was in the shop. You know how he is." Elena sat alone in her apartment after the call, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. She wasn't stupid, she wasn't naive. She worked in marketing. She could smell, spin sense manipulation, deconstruct a lie, wrapped in a smile. But in love, we want so badly to believe. We want to believe in effort, in good intentions, in second chances, in maybe I'm overthinking. And so Elena did what so many women do when the truth whispers too close. She doubted herself instead. She went to bed that night telling herself to stop being dramatic. Telling herself that families helped with weddings. That sisters flirted harmlessly. That tired men said careless things. But deep down underneath the lipstick and spreadsheets and logical explanations, something had shifted. A crack in the mirror. A distortion she couldn't unsee. It was raining again. The kind of soft drizzle Boston knew well, gentle enough to ignore, steady enough to soak you if you weren't paying attention. Elena stepped out of the cab, brown paper bag in hand, her heels clicking against the slick pavement as she made her way toward Derek's office building. Inside the bag was his favorite sandwich from the deli across her office, pastrami on rye, with extra pickles, a small bag of salt and vinegar chips, and a double chocolate cookie. Comfort food. A peace offering. A reminder. He'd been distant again all week. The therapy session she'd started secretly the month before had taught her not to internalize everything. Sometimes you need to interrupt your patterns, the therapist said. Do something small, show up differently. So here she was showing up. The security guard recognized her and waved her through. Elena nodded politely, smoothing her coat and glancing at her reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls. Her eyes looked tired. The dark circles were harder to hide now. But her lipstick was fresh and she had hope. That had to count for something. She stepped out onto the 12th floor and was greeted by Margot, Derek's assistant. Rebecca, we weren't expecting you, Margot said, clearly startled. Elena lifted the bag with a small smile. Just thought I'd bring him lunch. Surprise him. Margot's eyes flickered toward Derek's closed office door. He's in a meeting at the moment. Let me check if he can. I'll wait, Elena said. Margot hesitated. He asked not to be disturbed. Elena tilted her head, pulse rising. Is he alone in there? There was the briefest pause. Margot began, but Elena was already moving. She pushed open the door without knocking. And there it was. Time stopped. Derek leaning against his desk. Lauren standing between his legs, his hands on her waist, her arms wrapped around his neck. Their lips locked in a kiss so familiar, so practiced that Elena knew it hadn't been the first. They didn't notice her right away. She had time to memorize it all. The way Lauren's skirt was slightly bunched, the looseness of Derek's tie, the soft sound of their breathing. The intimacy. When the door clicked shut behind her, they finally turned. 3 faces. Frozen. Elena's heartbeat sounded like glass shattering inside her chest. Rebecca, Derek started, his voice smooth, rehearsed. This isn't what it looks like, he said, stepping forward. Lauren didn't even pretend. She didn't flinch. She didn't hide. She lifted her chin and said, we didn't plan this, it just happened. Elena stood still. She felt nothing. Or maybe everything at once. A numbness that seared. How long? She asked. Her voice didn't shake. It floated. Derek glanced at Lauren, then back at her. Rebecca, let's not do this here. How long? Lauren looked down for the first time. Since the engagement party. Elena blinked. 18 months of dating. 4 months engaged. And half that time he had been hers and hers. The betrayal sank in slow. Every rescheduled date, every distracted glance, every text at midnight. It all made sense now, and it destroyed her. She didn't scream. Didn't cry. She just dropped the lunch bag, letting the sandwich thud quietly to the floor. You made me believe I was crazy, she whispered. You made me doubt my own gut. Derek pressed a button on his desk. Margot, could you? I'm leaving, Elena said. Don't worry. I can escort myself. She walked out, her back straight. But by the time she reached her car, she couldn't breathe. The sobs started as hiccups, sharp, shallow gasps. Then they broke open, full-bodied, uncontrollable. She clutched the steering wheel, knuckles, white forehead against the leather. It took her 3 tries to start the engine. The drive home was a blur of wet streets and radio static. Somehow, she ended up on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to her chest, phone in hand, shaking. She called her mother. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. Ellie Margaret's voice came through the line soft and alarmed. Elena choked on a breath. Sweetheart, where are you? Still no words, just tears, just breathing. Stay on the line, I'm coming. She didn't know how much time passed. She only knew that at some point the front door opened. She heard keys drop. Heard the familiar click of heels. Then her mother's arms were around her. Oh, baby, Margaret whispered. Oh, sweetheart. Elena didn't speak. She collapsed into her mother's lap like she had when she was 5 and skinned her knee or 16 and had her heart broken by her first real crush. Margaret rocked her gently back and forth, humming a song that had no words, just sound. Just comfort. For a long time that was enough. That night her mother made tea she didn't drink, and soup she couldn't eat. She sat on the edge of Elena's bed and stroked her hair like she used to, whispering things like, "You are still whole and this pain will pass." But Elena didn't believe her. Not yet. All she could feel was the sting of the ring that had once been hers, now on another woman's finger. A woman who shared her blood. Canceling a wedding wasn't as dramatic as the movies made it seem. There were no screaming matches in bridal shops or fiery speeches in churches. There were phone calls. Dozens of them. Vendor cancellations, refund negotiations. Apologies to friends who had already booked flights. Every ring of her phone was a reminder of what had almost been. Elena moved through it like a ghost. Her father handled the financials. Her mother stayed by her side for the logistics, the cake vendor, the caterer, the venue deposit. Each checkbox ticked off on a spreadsheet that used to represent a dream now felt like erasing parts of a life that never got to be lived. She mailed the engagement ring back to Derek. She didn't leave a note. A week later, Lauren moved in with him. Elena knew because she drove past the building one night, the one they were supposed to share after the wedding. She didn't intend to. Her hands had simply turned the wheel while her mind wandered. Lauren's car was in the driveway. The curtains in the master bedroom glowed with warm yellow light. Elena parked a block away and cried until her throat burned. It was the beginning of a long descent. At first she told herself she was fine. She went back to work. She smiled through meetings, presented at marketing reviews, gave polite nods in the elevator. But the mask cracked quickly. She forgot deadlines. Missed an important call with a top-tier client. One day she burst into tears mid-presentation without knowing why. Her boss called her into his office. "Elena, you've always been one of our strongest players," he said gently. "But I think it's time to take a break." She didn't argue. She packed her desk the next morning. For weeks she barely left her apartment. Food spoiled in the fridge. Dishes piled up. She watched shows she didn't care about, let her phone buzz unanswered. She couldn't bear to hear well-meaning sympathy from friends who didn't know what to say. Even breathing felt like work. Her mother called every day. Sometimes Elena answered, sometimes she didn't. Margaret never pushed, only left voicemails that said, "I love you," or "No pressure, just checking in," or sometimes simply, "It's sunny today. I hope you felt a little of it." One afternoon Elena finally answered, and the words came out in a flood. "I don't know who I am without him," she sobbed. Margaret listened in silence. Then she said, "You are still Elena. You were never built from Derek. You existed before him. You'll exist after." A week later, Elena's old regional director called. A position had opened in the Chicago office, a lateral move but a fresh start. "I know it's sudden," he said, "but you've always been exceptional. I'd love to have you there." She almost declined. Starting over felt impossible. But staying surrounded by memories, by whispers, by the smell of betrayal woven into every street felt worse, so she said yes. The apartment in Boston needed to be cleared out. Margaret arrived with boxes and tape and a determination only mothers possess. Together they packed books, kitchen utensils, winter coats. Every drawer held ghosts. Elena found old birthday cards from Derek, a photo strip of the two of them from Martha's Vineyard, a note he'd left once in her planner. "You amaze me. Always." She threw them away without ceremony. On the last night before her move, they sat on the floor among half-sealed boxes, eating takeout from paper containers. "You sure about this?" Margaret asked. "No," Elena admitted. But I think it's the first step I've made in months that isn't about running away. Margaret smiled. Then that's enough. They sat in silence for a while. Then as Elena began taping the last box, her mother leaned over and said softly, "Forgiveness isn't about them, it's about freeing yourself." Elena didn't answer. Not then. The wound was too raw. The thought of forgiving Lauren or Derek felt like betrayal to herself. But the words lodged in her heart like a seed waiting for the right season. The next morning Margaret helped load the final suitcase into the cab. They hugged on the sidewalk. "Call me when you land," her mother said, kissing her forehead. "I will. I love you." "I love you too." Elena didn't see what her mother slipped into the side pocket of her suitcase until that night alone in a sterile new apartment in Chicago. She was unpacking slowly, methodically when her fingers brushed against a soft leather cover. She pulled it out. A journal. Inside, her mother's neat cursive flowed across the pages. Not daily entries, but moments, memories. Little letters to herself. To Elena. To Lauren. Words of hope, sorrow, love. Hopes for their happiness. Her own fears about growing older. Her wishes that her daughters would find their way back to each other. The last entry dated a week before the move read, "I couldn't protect her from this. I wanted to. But I see her now, shattered, yes, but still standing. My Elena. My storm in heels. She'll find her way back. I believe in her more than she believes in herself." Elena clutched the journal to her chest and cried for the first time, not from despair but from being seen. This move wasn't a finish line. But maybe it was a beginning. The first time Elena saw Lucas Foster, he was standing alone in a sea of suits, his hands tucked casually in the pockets of a dark gray blazer. It was at a technology innovation conference in San Francisco, her first big business trip since transferring to Chicago. Her team had been invited to network with potential investors and tech partners. The atmosphere buzzed with pitch decks, clinking glasses, and elevator speeches delivered with practiced charm. Lucas was different. He wasn't talking over anyone. He wasn't flashing business cards or checking his phone between conversations. He just listened, eyes steady, posture relaxed, offering nods that made people feel heard. He noticed her before she realized he was even looking. "Digital storytelling strategist," he said, glancing at her name badge. "That's one of the more interesting titles I've seen all day." Elena laughed lightly. "It's a fancy way of saying I make tech sound human." "That's a talent," he said, extending his hand. Lucas Foster. The name flickered something in her brain familiar. But she couldn't place it. They ended up seated beside each other at a networking dinner that night. The table was crowded, the wine flowing freely, but Elena found herself tuning out everyone else. Lucas asked about her favorite books instead of her latest campaigns. He wanted to know what made her move to Chicago, not just when. "I needed a fresh start," she said, choosing honesty. "Fresh starts are brave," he replied. "I used to think they were a sign of failure. Now I think they're proof we survive." Something in the way he said it made her curious. They exchanged business cards. She expected it to end there. But the next morning, Lucas emailed her. "If you're free after the afternoon keynote, I'd love to continue our conversation, less about metrics, more about meaning." They met for coffee in a quiet corner of the hotel lobby. She found herself smiling more than she had in months. It was effortless. Grounded. When she returned to Chicago, they kept in touch. A few work-related emails became more personal, book recommendations, recipes, photos of city views. There was no rush. No pressure. Just a slow unfolding. 3 weeks later, he flew to Chicago for a client meeting and asked if she'd like to have dinner. She almost said no. Dating still felt like walking across a frozen lake, thin, cold, unpredictable. But something in Lucas's eyes, in the way he never demanded more than she could give, made her whisper yes. They chose a quiet French bistro near her apartment. She wore navy silk and tried not to overthink everything. The first 10 minutes were lovely wine, small talk, laughter. Then, halfway through the appetizer, it hit. A wave of panic. Her throat tightened. Her vision blurred. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Lucas noticed instantly. Elena. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to run. Instead, Lucas quietly signaled the waiter, asked for the check, and turned his full attention back to her. He didn't panic, didn't rush her, didn't pepper her with questions. He simply said, "Take all the time you need. I'm right here," and he stayed. They sat in silence for 20 minutes. When her breath finally steadied, when the tears stopped spilling, she looked at him embarrassed, ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't expect that to happen." "You don't owe me an apology," he said. "We all carry our stories. Some of them still echo." She told him everything that night. About Derek. About Lauren. About the wedding that never happened. About the day she fell apart on her bathroom floor. Lucas listened quietly, respectfully. When she finished, he nodded. "My ex-wife left me," he said, his voice low. "For my co-founder. We built the company together, every late night, every dollar. She took him and half of everything else." The pain in his voice wasn't fresh, but it was deep. Worn in like a scar, long since healed but never forgotten. "I haven't told many people," that he admitted. "Not because I'm ashamed, just because most people want happy stories. They're uncomfortable with broken beginnings." Elena looked at him, really looked. Here was a man who understood grief. Not just the grief of loss, but the grief of betrayal, of misplaced trust, of starting over from rubble. But he hadn't let it harden him. He was still kind, still open, still capable of showing up with soft eyes and steady hands. They didn't kiss that night. Instead, he walked her home, offered his coat when the wind picked up, and said, "If you ever want to try again, coffee, dinner, silence, I'm here." She nodded. "So am I." It wasn't fireworks. It was a match struck in a dark room. And it was enough to light the way forward. 1 year after moving to Chicago, Elena barely recognized her life. Her promotion to senior marketing director had come with a corner office overlooking the river, a team that admired her leadership, and the chance to finally mentor younger women in the industry, something that brought her quiet joy. Her nights were filled with book clubs, homemade dinners, walks through Lincoln Park, and soft jazz humming from Lucas's record player. But the biggest shift had nothing to do with career. It was the stillness inside her. The anxiety that once clung to her ribs like wet fabric had loosened. The nightmares came less often. The mirror no longer reflected someone haunted but someone healing. Lucas had become a constant. Not the kind that overwhelmed or demanded, but the kind that felt like a home. He never asked her to be someone else. He simply met her where she was over and over again. So when he proposed, Elena didn't cry. Not from fear. Not from grief. She smiled. They were walking through the Chicago Botanic Garden, one of their favorite weekend rituals. Spring had painted the paths with tulips and hyacinths. Beneath a trellis of climbing roses, Lucas stopped, pulled out a simple box, and said, "Elena, I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking to be part of your future." Inside the box was not a diamond. It was an emerald deep green, with 2 small diamonds flanking it. Elegant, strong, quietly striking. Like her, she said yes. Not because she was trying to fix something broken, but because this time she was whole. They planned a small wedding, just 30 guests, no grand gestures, no society page announcements. Just the people who had walked with them through the storm. Her mother Margaret cried happy tears on the phone. "He sounds wonderful, darling. When can we meet him?" Soon, Elena promised. And when Lucas flew to Boston with her for the first time, he brought flowers for Margaret and books for her father. By the end of the weekend, Margaret hugged her daughter tightly and whispered, "He's the one, Ellie. I can feel it." As they finalized the guest list, Margaret gently broached a subject Elena had avoided. "Have you thought about inviting Lauren?" Elena looked up, startled. "Why?" "Because healing isn't always about what they deserve," Margaret said softly. "Sometimes it's about what we need to release." "I don't want to see her." "I understand, but you don't have to see her to invite her." There was a long silence. Then Elena nodded. The invitation she sent wasn't flowery or forgiving. It was simple, neutral. An extension of grace, not reconciliation. Lauren's reply came via email. "Thank you for the invitation. Unfortunately, I'll be traveling for work that weekend. Congratulations on your engagement. Wishing you the best." No warmth. No apology, just distance. And for the first time, it didn't cut Elena open. She sat with the email for a moment. Then she closed her laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. The sky over Chicago was streaked in early evening gold. Below, people hurried home, arms filled with groceries and tired children. Life went on. So would she. Her wedding day dawned with soft sun and a breeze that fluttered the curtains of their Airbnb cottage near Lake Michigan. The ceremony was held in the garden behind a restored historic inn. Lavender lined the aisle. Her dress was ivory satin, simple but breathtaking. Her father walked her down the aisle, his grip firm, his eyes misted. "I haven't seen you this peaceful in years," he whispered. She smiled. "I haven't felt this peaceful in years." Lucas stood waiting under a wooden arch draped in wildflowers, his eyes never leaving hers. Their vows weren't poetic or rehearsed, they were true. "I promise to honor the storms that made you," Lucas said, "and to never mistake your softness for weakness." Elena took a breath, voice steady. "I promise to trust in our quiet love. To know that home is not where we came from but where we choose to build." When they exchanged rings, her emerald caught the light, gleaming like the forest after rain. It wasn't about replacing what had been lost. It was about choosing what came next. After the ceremony, her mother pulled her aside. "I know you didn't need her there," she said, "but I'm proud of you for inviting her." "I didn't do it for her," Elena replied. "I did it for me, so that when I look at my life I know I built it without bitterness." Margaret nodded, eyes shining. "You are more your own woman than ever." As the sun dipped behind the trees and their small group of guests danced barefoot on the lawn, Elena felt something she hadn't in years. Light. Unburdened. And free. The sky hung heavy with clouds the morning of her mother's funeral. The kind of gray that blanketed the city in stillness, making everything from footsteps to whispered condolences sound softer. Elena stood beside her father in the front pew of the church, her hand gently resting on his arm as the organ played a slow hymn. Her other hand was clasped in Lucas's. His touch, as always, grounded her. She had spoken to Lauren only once since the wedding, briefly, cordially. Their contact remained rare and carefully distant, like two tectonic plates that had decided it was better to live parallel than to crash again. But death-like love had a way of gathering the estranged. And so Lauren came. Fashionably late, of course. She entered the church with practiced poise, dressed in black silk and pearls, flanked by a nanny holding her toddler and Derek at her side. The child, a wide-eyed girl with a bow in her hair, clutched a tablet and wore tiny designer shoes. Lauren's hand was adorned with a newer, larger ring than the one that once graced Elena's finger. They walked past the pews with the subtle swagger of people who had something to prove. Lauren leaned down to hug their father, kissing his cheek with a careful tear that didn't quite wet her face. "You look tired, Dad. Are you eating?" Then she turned to Elena. "Elena," she said, her smile sharp. "It's been too long." Elena nodded politely. "Lauren." Her eyes drifted to the little girl. "She's beautiful," Elena offered genuinely. Lauren beamed. "Her name's Clara. We're considering enrolling her in a bilingual preschool. You know, get a head start." She glanced around the room. "We just finished renovating our place in Beacon Hill, 8 bedrooms, wine cellar, full rooftop garden. Derek's firm is expanding again." Derek, silent beside her, offered a polite nod. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She simply smiled and turned slightly. "Have you met my husband?" Lucas stepped forward, tall and composed in a perfectly cut navy suit. He extended a hand. Lucas Foster. The moment Derek saw him, the world seemed to tilt. His confident smile faltered. Color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Lucas's voice remained calm, almost cordial. "Good to see you again, Derek. It's been, what? 7 years since Innovatech chose us over Computer." A flicker of recognition lit Lauren's eyes, followed by confusion. "You two know each other?" she asked, looking between them. "We do," Lucas said smoothly. "His company and mine once competed for the same acquisition. I won." Elena watched it unfold like a quiet storm. Derek shifted uncomfortably, the collar of his shirt suddenly too tight. Lauren's smile began to strain. "Oh," she said finally. Elena stepped closer to her sister, not threatening, not cruel. Just steady. She leaned in and with a voice as soft as silk and sharp as truth said, "You took my past, Lauren, I built my future." And then she turned away, slipping her hand into Lucas's. No theatrics. No raised voices. Just power. The kind that didn't need to shout. Back in her seat, Elena focused on the service. She didn't watch Lauren. Didn't care whether Derek whispered or squirmed. Her attention was on the portrait at the front, her mother captured in a candid moment laughing beside a garden bed. That's what mattered. Later at the reception in the family home, Lauren tried again. She dropped casual boasts into conversations, private schools, investment properties, charity galas. But no one leaned in to listen. Not like they did with Lucas, who stood in the corner talking to Elena's father about startups that supported single mothers and sustainable tech. Elena watched it all with quiet detachment. She didn't need to win, she already had. The day after the funeral, the house was quieter than it had ever been. No murmurs of guests, no casserole dishes being shuffled across counters, no well-meaning condolences filling the silence. Just the soft creak of old floorboards and the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. A home hollowed by absence. Elena stayed behind while her father went to his brother Peter's for dinner. He needed time with family, someone who remembered Margaret not just as your wife or the girl's mother, but as a sister, a fierce card player, a terrible singer, and the soul of every room she entered. Elena, though, needed the house. She needed the air that still held the trace of her mother's lavender lotion. She needed to be close to the walls her mother had painted herself, the shelves she'd filled with books and wisdom. She wasn't ready to leave yet. It was just after sunset when the knock came. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, Lauren stood there. Alone. No makeup. No designer coat. Just jeans, a faded gray sweater, and exhaustion clinging to her like fog. Her usually perfect hair hung limply around her face, and the corners of her mouth twitched like she couldn't quite remember what to do with them. "Hi," she said simply. "Can I come in?" Elena's breath caught in her chest. For a moment, all she saw was the sister from 6 years ago, the one who stood behind her at the engagement party, champagne in hand and secrets in her eyes. But then she looked closer. And she saw something else someone emptied. She stepped aside wordlessly. They sat in the kitchen, their mother's kitchen where they'd once fought over the last pancake, braided each other's hair, whispered about high school crushes. Now they sat across from one another as grown women with more damage than defense. "I left Derek," Lauren said after a long silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena blinked. "What? I packed 2 suitcases and Clara's stuffed rabbit. I didn't even tell him I was leaving." She exhaled shakily. He's not who I thought he was. Or maybe he always was and I just didn't want to see it. He monitors everything, my spending, my phone, my emails. He criticizes what I wear, how I talk. Clara can't even play with certain toys unless they're educational. And the company's in debt. Deep. He leveraged everything to keep up appearances. The vacations, the car, all on borrowed money. The Beacon Hill house about to be foreclosed. It's all been a facade. She stared down into her untouched tea. "I thought I was taking your life from you, you know. Like it was a prize. But it turns out I just inherited your heartbreak." Elena said nothing. Her heart beat painfully, a strange ache of past betrayal mixing with an emotion she hadn't expected, pity. Lauren continued. "I know I don't deserve your sympathy, or your time, but I'm tired, Elena. And for the first time in years, I don't want to win. I just want to feel real again." Elena rose without a word and disappeared down the hall. When she returned, she placed something gently on the table. A worn leather journal. Lauren looked at it like it might bite her. "Mom's," Elena said. "She wrote in it for years. Letters, thoughts, prayers, recipes. Mostly about us." Lauren reached for it slowly. Her fingers trembled. She flipped it open and began reading aloud. "The 17th of April, Lauren said today that she would never want to be like Elena. But the way she watched her sister speak at the school panel told me otherwise." Her voice cracked. She flipped a few pages. The 3rd of December, I dream of a day when the girls sit side by side not as rivals but as women who've survived this world together. That will be my greatest joy. Tears slid down Lauren's cheeks. She saw everything, she whispered. Even when we thought she didn't. She always did, Elena murmured. Later that night, they found themselves in the living room, pulling out old photo albums. They flipped through page after page of matching dresses, summer picnics, birthdays with lopsided cakes. They laughed not performatively, not bitterly. Just two sisters sharing something ancient. You remember how Mom used to leave us notes in our lunchboxes? Lauren asked. She never repeated the same one, Elena said. I kept a few. I always thought she gave you the better ones. She didn't. Elena smiled. She just knew what we each needed. They sat close now, the kind of close that would have been impossible months ago. Their shoulders touched. The silence between them wasn't jagged anymore. It was soft. Healing. No apologies were exchanged. No promises. No dramatic reconciliations. Just the beginning of something better. Later, Elena took Lauren to the backyard garden, the one their mother had tended for decades. It had become overgrown in recent months, weeds pushing between bricks, petals falling from untended roses. We should trim this back, Elena said softly. Mom would hate to see it like this. Together they pulled weeds. Lauren pruned dead blossoms. Elena dug around the lavender bed, uncovering the neat little sign their mother had made that read, "Grace grows here." They worked in silence. And in that shared motion, hands, dirty knees on the earth, grief clinging to the air, they rebuilt something that had long been broken. Forgiveness hadn't erased the pain, but it had made space for something else. And sometimes that's how healing begins. The soft scent of fresh paint clung to the air like a promise. Elena stood at the doorway of the nursery, one hand resting gently on the swell of her belly, the other gripping a warm cup of mint tea. Inside the room, Lucas hummed to himself, dipping his roller into a tray of sage green paint, her favorite shade, the one that reminded her of calm after storms. He turned and grinned. You're staring again. I know, she said, her voice catching slightly. I'm trying to memorize everything. Lucas set down the roller and crossed the room to her. He pressed his palm gently against her stomach and leaned his forehead to hers. I can't believe we're here, he whispered. Neither could she. For years, doctors had shaken their heads using phrases like low likelihood, diminished reserve, and explore other options. There had been tears behind closed bathroom doors, awkward silences at baby showers, and moments of quiet jealousy she hated herself for. And then, without warning or procedure, the two pink lines had appeared one rainy morning in October. She had stood in the kitchen for nearly an hour, barefoot, clutching the stick and staring at the window as tears slid down her cheeks. It hadn't felt real until she'd told Lucas. And even then, it hadn't truly sunk in until her first ultrasound, when the grainy shape fluttered on the screen like a fragile miracle. Now the room was taking shape: crib in one corner, a glider chair near the window, and walls slowly blooming into soft green. Lucas bent to kiss her stomach. You're going to have the best mom. Elena smiled. And the most patient dad. A ping interrupted their moment. Her phone buzzed on the hallway table. A text from Lauren. Just signed the final divorce papers. The apartment is small but mine. I'm starting over for real this time. Thank you for not giving up on me. Elena stared at the screen for a long moment, her throat tightening. So much had changed in a year. So much had healed, even if some scars remained. She typed back, proud of you, Mom would be too. She returned to the nursery and sat in the glider, watching Lucas resume his work, slow and methodical. The color bloomed across the wall, with each stroke covering old paint and old shadows. She reached into the side drawer of the chair and pulled out her mother's journal. It had become a companion, something she turned to not for answers but for grounding. Some nights she'd read one line, some nights 10. Each page a quiet echo of her mother's love, wisdom, and hopes for her daughters. She opened to a page she hadn't noticed before. The handwriting was shakier, more fragile. If you're reading this, it means you made it through something you thought might break you. I hope you know that's where your strength lives, not in the perfection, but in the persistence. Elena exhaled slowly. Her mother had always known more than she let on. She looked around the room. The shelves would soon hold books. The walls soft art, the floor's tiny socks, and maybe someday laughter. For the first time, she felt truly ready. Not just for motherhood. For everything. Later that evening, she and Lucas sat on the porch steps sipping cocoa as the early spring air rolled in. The stars blinked overhead like old friends. The city lights hummed quietly in the distance. Lucas reached for her hand. "You ever think about how we got here?" he asked. She nodded. "More than I should." "Regrets?" She paused. "Number. Not anymore, just gratitude." He smiled. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a while they just breathed. In the silence, her thoughts drifted. To her mother. To Lauren. To the broken engagement. To the girl she once was curled on the bathroom floor convinced her world had ended. And now here she was. Whole, loved, expecting. She took a deep breath and whispered the words she had once been too afraid to believe. "They thought they took everything. But what they really did was set me free." The wind rustled the trees like applause. And somewhere deep inside her she knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was just a beautiful new beginning.